Back in 1970, there was a man who went by the name of Hamilton Finley. He lived in Orlando. He was a lawyer, a real estate developer. He had a couple of hotels. He was a bit of a socialite, so people knew who he was. His name was recognized. He found out that Walt Disney was coming here to Central Florida. And he thought, what a great opportunity to make a couple of bucks on the deal. As I told you, it's boom, boom, town USA. A lot of people were looking at how Disney was going to grow and what it could mean for them and how they could develop something. So he had the idea of actually purchasing some land over at the corner of Sand Lake Road and what became International Drive. It's right at the intersection of I-4 and Sand Lake Road. So if you think about Walt Disney's promotional video, the one thing he said was that he loved the fact that he was at the intersection of two major thoroughfares in the state of Florida, Florida's Turnpike and Interstate 4. So Mr. Hamilton decided that this was a great opportunity for him to buy some land in that corridor near I-4 and actually put a hotel there that he could develop and maybe would become a great place for people to come and stay. So he put a little bit of money, and by today's standards, it's really a little bit of money, into some property. I think it was something like 20 acres, 30 acres, something like that. Very small amount of property here at Sand Lake Road where it meets International Drive. Now, the road, International Drive, at the time didn't exist. It was just, this was all farmland. It was pasture. So what he decided to do was actually to put a dirt road that went from Sand Lake Road up, and he was going to call it Hamilton Drive. The problem was there was already a Hamilton Drive already in Orlando. So he decided instead to give it a more international flavor. You know, Disney was coming and he'd been talking about the Epcot with his idea of international community. So he decided to call it International Drive. So he got the name registered with the city and the county, and it became International Drive in this area. And as we went over time and we see how it got developed, it became more of one of these boom, boom, town USA kind of things where there was all these properties being developed all the way up and down International Drive from here, all the way into Osceola County. We're east of the Walt Disney World Resort, but a lot of people would be staying here, and so there was a lot of development along the way. I talked about on 192, Earl Bronson Highway, there was a lot of development, but also on International Drive, or what became International Drive, there was also a lot of development. The problem, unfortunately for Mr. Hamilton, was location. He bought these acres of land, but they were close to nothing except for I-4. And he wanted to build a Hilton hotel here. He called it the Hilton Inn South. And he had this idea for putting the property here and building this hotel. Cleared the land, got all the approvals, and started building. But wow, you know, you're far away from everything. His friends called it Finley's Folly. Now remember, his name was Finley. They call it Finley's Folly because they never thought he would be successful. They never thought he'd work it out, it was ever going to work for him. But it did. And here's the weird thing about it. He built this hotel here. It was in a location where you had to get off the interstate, come down a dirt road, and drive about a quarter of a mile, half a mile to pull into the property. And you could see the hotel from the interstate, but when you pulled off, it was kind of weird. It didn't look like it went anywhere. And you went a little bit down on Sand Lake Road and then made the turn on International Drive and drove up to his hotel. It was the only thing here. But it worked out really well, and surprisingly well. The Walt Disney Company had an issue. And their issue was they were opening 2 new hotels in the Contemporary and the Polynesian at the Walt Disney World Resort. But Disney had never been in the hotel business before, and they had an issue with how are they going to run, manage, and maintain these hotels in something they've never done. This was going to be a resort capital. They had this plan for building this entire Walt Disney World here and had plans for future hotels, but they'd never been in the hotel business. So one early idea was to go ahead and lease out the management of the hotels to an established management company, one of the hotel chains or one of the businesses that ran hotel chains. And that was discussed a lot, and then Disney decided they didn't want to do that. They wanted to run the hotels themselves. So they hired some people from different hotel chains and different established brands to come in and be the management staff, and then set about hiring staff to actually work in the hotel. But there was another problem here. You know, you're building a hotel from scratch. You're building it from the ground up. You don't know the inner workings of it. You're going to open in October of 1971, and you don't really know how that's going to work out because you haven't actually managed a hotel. So enter Finley Hamilton and his Hilton Inn South Orlando. Typically, when Disney executives would come to Orlando to do any of their business, especially in the early days before construction really started, they would stay in downtown Orlando up by Lake Eola. Remember the Cherry Plaza Hotel and also the other hotels that were in the area. Well, that was all great and fine and good, but the problem was they wanted to be closer to the property as it was being constructed. It's, you know, downtown Orlando is a little bit far from here. It's not really far, but it's, you know, a good 20-minute drive, and back in the day it was probably a half an hour or more. So they had to find a way to be closer. Along the way, Finley Hamilton had gotten to know Roy Disney a little bit. and they came to some sort of an agreement to actually use his hotel to train the staff. Now, how that agreement actually happened is really debatable. I don't think anybody understands how that agreement happens. Dave Smith, the archivist for the Walt Disney Company, said he never saw a contract between Hamilton and the Disney Company, between any executives. So it's not really clear how that would have worked, but here's what they did. For 16 months, from about June of 1970 to about October of 1971, Disney personnel took over his hotel. They actually ran the Hilton Inn South, Orlando. So it was all Disney people that were working there. It was all the staff that the Walt Disney Company had brought in who had worked at other hotel brands, and all the new cast members they had hired to come and work at the Contemporary and the Polynesian. They ran that hotel. For 16 months, they ran it. Now, the side note to this story is all the Disney executives came and stayed at that hotel. And every one of them would critique everything that happened in the hotel because they were trying to make it a better experience for guests. So they figured out how to make it better. Roy Disney was notoriously hard on the staff. He'd tell them all kinds of things about what was going on and what was wrong and what he thought about what they were doing. And that's probably to the best benefit in the long run because they opened 2 successful hotels in the Contemporary and the Polynesian. And they had a pretty good idea of how those hotel brands should run. So it was an interesting experience. They also brought in any new cast members or executives who were brought in to work at the Walt Disney World Resort who had not secured housing. They would stay in the hotel as well. So they had this hotel they stayed in. So pretty amazing that it all worked out that way. So Finley Hamilton had this interesting connection to the Walt Disney Company, and they would actually stay there and do the work. And it was really kind of neat that it worked out that way. It was kind of a fascinating thing that everything worked out. Now, the one thing that happened was Finley Hamilton, before he died, said he had lost $500,000 on this hotel branding deal, that it didn't work out that well for him in the long run. Now, whether he lost money or not is kind of debatable. I don't think anybody really knows if he gained or lost money. What we do know is since there was no contract, we don't know how he made money on this deal. But where he did make money, clearly, was in the development of International Drive and buying up a bunch of land. He decided along the way to buy up more land. Near here, kind of on the way to Disney and along the way, he kept purchasing land at small dollar values. And then he would sell it off at a very nice profit because he figured out that this was going to grow, that there was going to be more here, that Disney was going to invade the property and everything was going to take off. He gambled. He took a bet that it was going to work out for him, and it did. When Finley Hamilton died in the early 2000s, he was remembered fondly as having developed International Drive and having made something substantial happen here in the Orlando area as a result of the Walt Disney Company coming here. So it's a really interesting story, and it's one that you don't hear much about. So this property here, what is now the Coco Cay Resort, this is where the hotel was. This is where the Hilton Inn Orlando South was located. This is where he put his hotel that he actually built that became part of Walt Disney history. Now the hotel doesn't exist anymore. It was torn down probably in the 1990s, I think, and this is what replaced it. So it's kind of a shame that that little memento doesn't exist anymore, but it is on this location, and the dirt road is right out there, and you can see everything as it plays out. It's really pretty neat. I find it kind of fascinating the way this whole story came together, and you learn something interesting about Disney history and how they decided to get in the hotel business and run hotels. And so this location was selected. Actually, International Drive is just at the end of this street that you see here, and the hotel he created was actually on this property right here. Today it's the Coco Cay Resort, where you see the water park from I-4. You can probably hear the road noise from I-4 right behind me, or right here. This is I-4. The exit to Sand Lake Road is just down that way a little bit, and Disney is actually right over there, about 2 miles. You can't quite see it from here. So it's a great location to have a hotel that would be near Disney. Thinking about the prospect of engaging business and making something happen, that would be a good location to start. We're looking at International Drive. This was originally a dirt road that Mr. Hamilton put in to support his hotel, which is here at the corner of, essentially, Sand Lake Road, which is down at that traffic light, the one you see further down. So he built the hotel in this location and was banking on Disney big. So to give you a little perspective on where we are, this is the corner of International Drive and Sand Lake Road, and behind me is that giant McDonald's. You pass it if you ever head in that corner. If you ever get to that intersection, you'll know it right away. So that is the intersection where he created this International Drive to go up just about a half mile to get to his new hotel that he was building. Now, one more piece to the puzzle I'd like to share. As I mentioned, Disney had hired a number of people who worked in the hotel business to come and work at the Contemporary and the Polynesian in order to set it up and help make sure it was running properly. One of those people was Harris Rosen. He had graduated from the Cornell School of Hotel Administration and had been working at the Waldorf Astoria in New York for some period of time. The Walt Disney Company hired him specifically to come and work at the hotels and make sure that they were managed properly. Now, the follow-up to this story is that Mr. Rosen at some point had decided to leave the Walt Disney Company and open his own hotels. He had an interesting idea to come in and start with guest room rates that were really low, much lower than anybody else in the area, to fill more rooms. He purchased some land very near where the Hilton Inn South was located. You remember there's a small tract of land between where Sand Lake Road is and where the Hilton Hotel was. Well, he purchased a piece of land in between there and built a hotel. Now, Mr. Rosen ran a number of hotels in the direct area right around Sand Lake Road and International Drive. But this particular hotel, the Rosen Inn, is still under the same branded name and still run more or less the same way that Mr. Rosen started it 40 years ago.